The further you get along your personal development journey, the more crucial it becomes for you to protect yourself from toxic people who could undo all of your progress. So in this video, I'm going to share 6 ways authenticity can protect you from toxic people. Welcome to the BU channel, where we do a deep dive into personal development and look at it through the lens of authenticity. I'm Safia, author of the book BU, Your Life Depends on It, the original volume, and the Transformation Journal. Now, before we get into the ways that authenticity can protect you from toxic people, it's first important that we understand the nature and the psychology behind these types of individuals. So, what is a toxic person? So my personal definition of a toxic person is someone who frequently acts in their own immediate self-interest to the detriment of other people. Now, they would have a lot of things in common in terms of their traits. They might be very inconsiderate, insecure, defensive, low emotional quotient. They might be irritable and have a lot of mood swings. So these are some common traits that you might find between different toxic people. But I think the most common trait among all of them is their narcissistic tendencies. Now, I want to make it clear that just because someone is toxic, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have narcissistic personality disorder. There is a difference. Of course, there will be some overlap, but as far as I know, NPD is a mental health disorder that is lifelong and, according to the research, cannot be cured. But a toxic person, however, that's not a permanent state. It's more to do with their mindset. So I just wanted to make that clear. Okay, so what causes a person to become toxic? I think it's important that we answer this question because we need some context and some background as to what made these people into who they are. And it helps us identify who they are so that we can protect ourselves from them. From my understanding, there are 4 main origins of a person's toxicity: trauma, a dysfunctional upbringing, peer group socialization, and epigenetics. Now, before I dig deep into each one of those and explain, I just want to have a disclaimer right now that no matter what we've all gone through, we are ultimately responsible for managing our own behaviors. So before we continue, let's write our affirmation in the comments. My actions declare me the master of my destiny. So let's talk about trauma and how it could lead to toxicity. When a person has been through an intensely stressful situation or period in their life, that can lead to a long-lasting imprint on the mind that rewires the brain and transforms their way of thinking. These neural and subsequent behavioral changes are defense mechanisms that are very useful in the short term to protect the mind from that stressful reality. But in the long term, these defense mechanisms can become maladaptive and detrimental in the long run. Let's use an example. Let's say a person lost a parent during their childhood. In order to cope with that grief and that loss, a person could end up directing a lot of their attention and emotional resources inwards to themselves. But as they get older and try to have relationships and friendships, they might actually be seen as having a lot of selfish tendencies, lacking self-awareness, and maybe being self-absorbed. Now, just as a disclaimer for this example and all the examples to follow, that these are just hypothetical scenarios. Everyone is going to handle their experiences differently. But my examples here are just to deepen your understanding of what a toxic person's story could be, because having this context again is very, very important in knowing who you're protecting yourself from and how to identify them. Okay, so now let's talk about dysfunctional upbringing. When a person is raised in a dysfunctional family environment, they can become unaware and desensitized to toxic behaviors like poor emotional control, because those were the only behaviors that were modeled to them, and that's the only way they could successfully navigate that environment. But these toxic adaptations can actually be a hindrance to them in their future friendships and relationships, because they would bring forth unhealthy dynamics into those interactions. And it can make it incredibly difficult for them to be a part of healthy dynamics because they just weren't socialized to be a part of that. It's very unfamiliar territory for them. As an example, a person who was raised in a home where there was a poor communication, everyone's walking on eggshells, there's passive-aggressive behaviors, and no one truly resolves any conflict, that person can take those behaviors into their next relationships and friendships. They might struggle to be vulnerable and open up emotionally, which could lead to a build-up on resentment. Because of this lack of emotional maturity, they could actually end up sabotaging a lot of potentially amazing friendships and relationships. Now let's talk about peer group socialization. Because of our innate need to belong and be included with individuals similar to ourselves, our peers are one of the main groups involved in our secondary socialization. Secondary socialization is the process of us learning and adopting norms, values, habits, and behaviors. Sometimes our peer groups can actually have greater influence than our family because this innate need to belong is so strong. As an example, if a person was part of a clique in school where their criteria for excluding others is very trivial perhaps, and they reward conformity, that person may have been a part of that group in order to avoid being an outcast. But then that could lead them to having traits such as being judgmental and condescending towards people who don't fit that criteria, and this imaginary trivial criteria that the group holds. Thus, they might have behaviors, normalized behaviors, such as gossiping and excommunication. Another example is someone who would have been bullied in school. They might have adapted in ways that were helpful at the time to protect them, but bringing those forward are no longer healthy. So someone who's been bullied might have adapted by isolating themselves so they can cut down on the number of negative interactions that they're having with their peers. For that time being, it would have been very helpful, but moving forward, isolating themselves from their friends and people they want relationships with can actually deteriorate the quality of those relationships. They might be seen as selfish and uncaring. So that's one way that peer group socialization can lead to someone's toxicity. So now the final potential origin of a person's toxicity I mentioned was epigenetics. Epigenetics is pretty much the idea that as we go through life, our genetic code is being rewritten, altered, modified by our different experiences and our environment. So the people that came before us, their experiences, especially if they've gone through what we've just spoken about, trauma, peer group socialization, dysfunctional upbringing, those experiences become embedded in the DNA, in the genetic code, and passed down to their children. So even if someone who came before you has had a different response to an experience, that experience is already in your DNA. Their response is already in the DNA. So as much as we'd like to think we're blank slates when we come here, we're really not, because there's a lot of information already downloaded into our DNA before we experience anything. As an example, if we take the previous example where a person lost their parent in childhood and developed some selfish tendencies as a result, even if that person was to emotionally heal from that trauma, from that experience, and create a healthy two-parent household, their children could develop the same selfish, emotionally unavailable tendencies, or even struggle to get along with a parent because of that negative experience being written into the DNA. So that's just helping you put into perspective where a person's toxicity could be coming from. Now, I'll just reiterate my disclaimer that, again, not everyone who can relate to these experiences will become toxic. And even the people who might become toxic from these experiences might have completely different toxic characteristics. And that's what we're going to talk about next. The characteristics and psychology of a toxic person are mostly dependent on two things. First is their awareness of their toxic traits, and second is their willingness to change them. Based on these two parameters, there are 4 different types of toxic people there could be. I think it's important to make the distinction between these different types, because I don't want you to think that a toxic person is necessarily a bad person. I just want us to understand the mindset behind, because yes, some you could say they're toxic and they are inherently a bad person, but others are just not on their personal development journey yet. So I'm going to explain the toxic quadrant, I like to call it, with the 4 different types of toxic people. The first toxic person I'll describe is the person who is fully aware of their toxic behavior, but their willingness to change is completely non-existent. This is probably the most dangerous toxic person that I'll describe in this entire quadrant, because they see the benefits of their toxicity. They're fully aware of how they behave and what they stand to gain from it, especially in the short term. They can't imagine a world where they don't have any power, where they might be vulnerable. So there's no incentive for them to change. As far as they're concerned, changing will just make life more difficult for them, and it will remove the power that they have over other people and the outcomes in their life. When it comes to this type of toxic person, they require to hit rock bottom before they even think of changing. And rock bottom means different things to different people. It could mean completely losing it all, their friendships, their relationships, their reputation, their money, their house. And some people still won't change even after hitting so-called rock bottom. So these types of toxic people are incredibly dangerous. The next type of toxic person I'll describe is the one who is becoming fully aware of their toxic traits and toxic behaviors, and as a result, they're motivated to change. They're on a much more progressive path than the toxic person I previously described. They see how destructive their behaviors are to themselves and others in the short and long term. So they have a conscience and they see no other choice but to change. This catalyzes them to go on that journey of healing and self-discovery, to unpack all of their traumas and dysfunction and work towards authenticity. It doesn't come without shame and guilt, but they're willing to work through it because there's just no other option for them. Okay, the next type of toxic person I'll describe is the one who is completely oblivious to their toxic behaviors, and as a result, they can't change. It's likely that they're stuck in dysfunctional patterns and they see a lot of evidence of chaos in their life, but they believe they're victims of life, people, and circumstances. That's what they blame for them being in their current predicament. These toxic people would only change if they just get a wake-up call, if they clearly see how their behavior negatively impacts a particular outcome. And they also just need some honest self-reflection. Okay, now the last toxic person I'll describe is the one who is also unaware of their own toxicity, but they're just desperate to change something in their life. They see evidence of chaos in their life, but they're not sure where it's coming from. It's likely that their behaviors are reflected in those around them, so they don't see anything wrong with how they behave, but they know that something in their life needs to change. These types of toxic people, I don't think they'll stay toxic for long because they're searching for the answer. They're willing to change something, they just don't know what to change yet. Okay, so I know at this point you're probably wondering, why am I going into so much detail about toxic people? We've gone into their nature, their backgrounds, we've given so much context. And as well as knowing who exactly you're protecting yourself from, above that, I think it's important I gave this context so that we're not being harsh in judging toxic people. I really don't want you to leave this video with that mindset. We're all on our own personal development journey. Toxic people are still people with the capacity to change. Everyone just has different burdens, different stories, and different ways that we handle things. Okay? So being a toxic person doesn't mean that someone can't work towards being authentic. And being an authentic person doesn't mean that you were never toxic. Okay? So it swings and roundabouts. But once you do become authentic, it is imperative that you know how to protect yourself from people who could compromise your rare energy. So now we'll talk about the 6 ways authenticity protects you from toxic people. Leave a like below if you are ready to get into it. The first way authenticity protects you from toxic people is first impressions. When you meet someone for the first time, you can often get quite a good idea of how they perceive you, especially if you're an authentic person. When you see how they respond and carefully observe how they respond to the real you, that can tell you a lot about how they'll treat you in the future. Are they genuinely curious and interested, or are they silently judging you and collecting information about you to use in the future? By the same token, when you observe them carefully and make note of their red flags, rather than ignoring and rationalizing them away in the sake of charisma, your ability to perceive them clearly as well as yourself helps you to see right through any facade that they're trying to pull. This is quite a low effort way of repelling toxic people, because often they can tell when you're very perceptive of them. The second way authenticity protects you from toxic people is through intuitive discernment. Because you know yourself so well as an authentic person, you pay keen attention to your internal environment and how you feel rather than accepting people at face value. It makes you easily able to identify those who are operating from behind a mask, rather than relying on your physical senses and what the person wants you to perceive of them. You're relying on your foresight and your higher awareness to observe how they interact with different people in different contexts, how they interact with your emotions, their emotions, and the emotions of others. This makes you an expert at identifying who these toxic individuals are, but most importantly, navigating them with a high level of integrity and character. The third way authenticity protects you from toxic people is through self-respect. People who are very toxic tend to exert control over people who don't have enough self-respect to assert their boundaries. As an authentic person, however, you know exactly what you are and what you are not okay with, so you have no problem asserting your boundaries. This exposes the intentions of people who don't want to take no as an answer, because they're looking for an easy way to get what they want, so they'll have no choice but to just leave you alone and go to where it's easier to get what they want. The fourth way authenticity protects you from toxic people is inner peace. Authentic people maintain a very calm internal environment, which they monitor quite closely. It helps them avoid unnecessary drama and the toxic people who tend to be at the center of it all. Because of this, it's easy to identify people who are the biggest threat to that inner peace way before becoming emotionally attached to toxic people. The fifth way authenticity protects you from toxic people is self-love. Authentic people don't rely on others to show them kind gestures or say nice things to them in order to feel valued. This gives them the upper hand against toxic people who use flattery and love bombing as a weapon. Some toxic people even use good deeds as leverage, as a way of manipulating other people's behavior and controlling their emotions. This does tend to work on a lot of people who haven't yet identified their own weaknesses and been able to patch them up before a predatory-minded individual preys on them. As a result, they become attached to this person who showed them kindness in the beginning of their relationship or friendship, but ultimately takes them on an emotional roller coaster ride. But a content person cannot be controlled, because even when you take kindness away from them, they're still left with their self-respect, self-esteem, confidence, and their dignity. The sixth way authenticity protects you from toxic people is self-validation. As an authentic person, very in tune with your emotional environment, your biggest defense against toxic people is your ability to validate what you feel and what you experience. This is super important against toxic people who frequently try to gaslight you. Because they can't control your perception of reality, they therefore cannot control your emotions or your behaviors. Although the main purpose of this video was to help authentic people know how to protect themselves from toxic individuals, if you found that upon reflection you might have some toxic tendencies, then I don't want you to beat yourself up, okay? The first thing I want you to do is give yourself a pat on the back, because self-reflecting is the first step to improving. Secondly, it's time for action now. Now that you've identified these toxic behaviors, or that there might be some, it's time for you to take action. That means finding the root of these behaviors and these thinkings and working towards becoming healthy and whole again. Just for this, just for you, I've written 2 books, okay? The original volume and Transformation Journal, the main title being Be You, Your Life Depends on It. Now, whether you're getting the physical copies or the digital copies, by the time you finish going through both of these books, you will understand how to use authenticity as the blueprint to completely transform your life. So I will leave a link below for you to get both of those. On a separate note, if you have ever been the victim of a toxic person or toxic people, then my previous video is definitely for you. It's all about mental toughness, but I think you'll find that something very useful for you. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. I trust that you found it very informative and interesting. If you did, please make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and share it with someone who you think needs to hear this as well. Keep shining, and always remember, be you. Your life depends on it. See you in the next video. Bye for now.